Welcome, everyone. I'm so pleased that you're joining me today to talk about unlocking strength within and navigating relationships with Parkinson's disease. My name is Sheila Moore. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I'm a clinical social worker at the Pacific Movement Disorder Center, part of the Pacific Neuroscience Institute at St. John's Medical Center, and I'm very proud to be an APDA Information and Referral Coordinator. I'm so pleased that you're joining today. I hope that you're bringing questions, ideas, perhaps some concerns today, and I'm really hoping that we're going to be able to address some of those issues and introduce you to some perhaps new and different ways of approaching relationships. I'd like to welcome you today. I'm grateful to be here today. You and I are really initiating a new and important series for APDA and more of an emotional support series. And so I'm really happy that you're joining me today. Today is going to be, for me, an opportunity to remind you that we all, oh, if you could back up, sorry. Thank you. Remind you that we all have strength within us. I'm hoping that we'll be able to explore what it means to unlock that strength and also to strengthen the bonds of relationships and really to navigate relationships, the ups, the downs, the twists, the turns, and the open roads. So today, I'd like to invite you to think about the relationships in your life. Just take a moment to review the impact that Parkinson's disease might have on those relationships, the impact relationships have on Parkinson's disease. I'd like to bring into focus the relationship with care partners, friends, and family. And I'd like to spend some time exploring the power of fostering compassionate relationship with yourself. At the end of our time together, I'm hoping that we'll have the opportunity to have reviewed some tools, that there'll be takeaways for you. And what's important for me right from the beginning is to let you know that this is really just a beginning. There's really no way that I can, in even within an hour, begin to explore and discuss some of the nuances that will be your very personal experience. But what I do hope is that this is going to give you some ideas and ways to think about things differently, and hopefully inspire you to feel hopeful, to want to work on those any relationships and celebrate them, and navigate both the good and the bad. So let's talk a little bit about relationships and connections. Thank you. Science tells us that relationships and connections are powerful at any age under all conditions. And I think we've all experienced that as we've moved through the pandemic. We've all realized how important it was to remain safe and to pull in and stay safe at home. But I think that came at a price in terms of how we felt disconnected at times and the challenges of reaching out and trying to make those connections with family and friends. Connections through our relationships are a substantial psychosocial determinant of health. Our relationships directly impact our health, and that's important to be reminded of. Relationships and connections impact the symptoms of PD, our quality of life, emotional health, and well-being, both positively and negatively. And I'm hopefully we'll have a little bit of time to celebrate a little bit in terms of that, but we're also going to be tackling some challenges today. So let's talk a little bit about the relationships and the positive impact that they have. You know, we're talking about these psychosocial determinants of health, how important they are. And this is really an illustration of how important relationships are, right? They're key to our well being, they contribute to better health outcomes, to living well. It's Our relationships are powerful because they help us feel less stress when we're having a hard time, and they directly and powerfully impact depression, anxiety, and stress. Relationships help shape our perspectives. These social ties that we have, our friends, they are useful in terms of framing challenges that foster solutions. Without these connections, sometimes we can get mired in the problem. But with the support and encouragement of friends, that bonds, it really helps us foster solution, kind of lean in that direction. Relationships contribute to our health and our outlook on life. And particularly for care partners, I always like to make sure that we address the needs of care partners, that relationships help in terms of managing better, quality of self care that we're asking you and inviting you to participate in. Relationships reduce stress and really help care partners feel not so alone. So I'd like to spend some time on a graph about really illustrating. I love visuals, illustrating relationships and how impactful and how they interact. Right. So we're talking. I think we've all heard a lot about the mind-body connection. And I'd like to talk about the mind, body, and spirit connection. I'm just going to briefly talk about it here. But in terms of relationship, the relationships affect the mind in terms of our social wellness, intellectual wellness, and emotional wellness. From that body's perspective, it has a direct impact on physical wellness, and we'll see that during our conversation today. And it certainly helps in terms of our spiritual wellness, in terms of what buoys us up. What's the wind beneath our wings, so to speak. And it's really these relationships are key, critical, and very important. So I'd like now to talk a little bit about a powerful quote. Dr. Indu Subramanian, who's local here. I'm in Los Angeles. She's the director of the Parkinson's Disease Research Center at the VA. And she was in conversation talking about some recent research that she did with people who were experiencing Parkinson's disease and the impact of isolation and loneliness. So it was an important and impactful research that she did. And she commented that I would hope that one could think about social connections, and we can superimpose relationships as a basic nutrient, just like food and water and sunlight and shelter. I think this is something that we need as human beings. I think that's really a powerful quote, and I hope that you'll think about it and think about that relationships are that vital, like nutrients, sunshine, you know, shelter. It's key and they're important. So it's important, and I'm so appreciative of having the opportunity to talk to you today about that. So let's talk about relationships in PD. And just in the broadest of terms, many things change after a diagnosis of Parkinson's disease. Sometimes prior to the diagnosis, things are beginning to change. You're noticing difference, care partners noticing difference, families noticing difference, and days can fluctuate, right? Energy levels shift, ease of movement shift, mental clarity, and just in general, kind of fluctuations happen during the day, sometimes between morning and night, sometimes hour to hour, dependent upon medications, the kinds of things that you're doing. What do you have planned, for example? How do you navigate through these changes, this change in the day? How do you build, foster, and sustain relationships that will support you and that are meaningful to you because they directly impact your physical well-being? So today I'm hoping that we'll have the opportunity to point to, and give you ideas about how to cultivate strengths, the strengths within. Sometimes I'll call it resilience, right? And how you can rely on this resilience, not only what's happening now in terms of how you're making it through this diagnosis and all that you're doing for your benefit, for your best health, but all that's come before, all that has brought you to this moment and navigating through the rough terrain. So I'm looking forward to that. You know, when I saw the title of the presentation today, "Navigating Through," I was really pleased because the word navigating is something I often use in terms of the community and the people that I'm working with here at the Pacific Movement Disorder Center. And so sometimes with the language that I use, I like to check in with dictionaries and see, am I using it right? Does it have a different meaning? Does it have a broader and deeper meaning that I'm using? And so I did the same today for navigating. And one of the definitions was to move on, over, or through. This was talking in terms of water, air, or land in ship or aircraft. So the idea that you're maneuvering, you're navigating through on your through things, moving forward is what I took from that. And another definition was to direct. And this has to do with oneself or one's way, carefully or safely. And I really appreciated the carefully and safely. And I hope that you'll keep that, kind of lock it here, maybe lock it here, in terms of moving through relationships with care partner, friends, and self carefully and safely. And so just like the compass and the navigational system, that I have in terms of visuals, that with the navigational system, we plug in directions. And I'm hoping that through navigating with relationships, we're going to be plugging in intention, maybe the intention to be kind, the intention to be patient, the intention of bringing out strengths and bonding with the key people in our lives. I also think when you're looking at the navigational, you think about openness, that as you're hearing the information turn here and turn there, that you're open to course corrections and changes in directions. The same, I think, with relationships and how we navigate those. And certainly the idea that although we can be very focused on the address and how we get from point A to point B, that sometimes we can really zoom out and see more of the bigger journey, the whole journey, the beginning to the end. And I'm also hoping that we'll be able to address that a little bit today as we talk about navigating relationships. So let's talk a little bit. I'd like to about navigating relationships and talk a little bit about this is for me. This is a summary slide, right? If I could impose and say, this is what I'd love for you to be able to take away, that no matter what relationships we're talking about in terms of navigation, whether it's care partners, friends, or self, that there are some key components, and I'm really hoping that I'll be able to address that today with you. It's about communication, a key component, about making that connection, and about self care or compassion, whether it's self compassion or compassion for the other in the relationship. So I'm hoping that's a summary, and that's something that I also hope that you'll keep close. So I'd like to start out by talking about navigating relationships with care partners, which is really is such an important one. I talk to people even this week. We're talking about, well, it's not just you that's been diagnosed with Parkinson's. I feel like it's we, the care partner, will say. So when we're talking about navigating relationships and care partners, I have a quote from Brene Brown who says, "We don't have to do all of it alone. We were never meant to." So the idea that we're really never meant to do this alone, and that our partnerships, particularly with our care partner, if we've been diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, it's critical, and it's important to take a look at that. So I'd like to talk a little bit about the parallel process. I often talk about this in terms of kind of that idea that one person might have the diagnosis, but for the care partner, there's also an equal, there's another road. There's these two paths that I think you begin to navigate through prior to the diagnosis. And even if I'm thinking about it and I'm thinking about it fairly, that I think throughout your life as a partner, as a life partner, as a couple, that there have been navigations that you've been made course corrections. And so I like to think about that and bringing that here to the diagnosis and to navigating the relationship with a frame of Parkinson's disease. So let's talk a little bit about the parallel process and that one path. Um, about living with Parkinson's disease. So, for those of you who've been diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, you've already begun to make these navigations. And so, for the person living with Parkinson's disease, some of the navigation begins at the very beginning with health. Sometimes there's a feeling of the loss of health with the diagnosis. There's a new culture, there's new lifestyles, there's new directions. Doctors are giving you new ideas about how to take care of yourself, things to change. Sometimes there's navigation through emotions, fear, anger, depression, anxiety, sometimes part of the non-motor symptoms, some part outcome of what you're experiencing. There's navigation of the future, sometimes the uncertainties, thinking about what might be ahead, what lies ahead for me might be overwhelming. That's another point of navigation. Fears of dependency. The community I work with often talk about how consuming, and there is such a focus about the fears of being dependent, of changing in that degree, in those degrees. The loss of health. Health is certainly, again, another kind of in-depth, the sadness and loss in terms of navigation, and what I call the intrusion of interventions. And I mean no respect to to our whole medical system, but sometimes, I have clients that say to me, "I feel like a professional patient all of a sudden. That maintaining my health, of doing everything that everyone's requested for my benefit, can be exhausting." So sometimes there's a navigation through the what I call the intrusion of these interventions, which is another navigation. So let's talk a little bit about the path for the care partner. So this other path, that's that path on that windy road is for our care partners, right? They're also navigating. You as a care partner are also navigating the fears of the future. How will things change for us? For me particularly, there's a navigation about investment in health outcomes, keeping the ship afloat, keeping the person that you're caring for as healthy as possible, watching for nuances, being vigilant about things. There's the loss of the health of your partner. There's maybe a change in your own identity, shifts, an addition of a role. What does that mean for me? That's a point of navigation. Also, anxieties and certainties about your own future, as well as the person that you're caring for or partnering with. Sometimes there's navigation around anger at the disease and the circumstances. And certainly there's navigation about stress, feeling overwhelmed, and sadness. So let's talk a little bit about how the changes related. We're talking about the navigations for both the person diagnosed with Parkinson's and care partners. Um, let's talk a little bit about how it changes the dynamics and some of the relationship. Well, certainly with all the changes, the focus of life can change around Parkinson's disease. So you're introducing new medications, timeliness of medications, doctor's visits. Sometimes there's a feeling of moving from engagement in community to health maintenance, like I spoke about. Sometimes the pace and rhythm of the day changes because there are kind of benchmarks during the days, things to hit, things to be done in terms of health maintenance. Life plans are often postponed, sometimes reimagined as a result of Parkinson's disease. There's a loss of spontaneity exchanged with intentional planning. And I find that often with the community I'm working with, moving from point A to B, sometimes it's not so spontaneous anymore. Sometimes it takes some time and planning, whether it's moving from house to car or just in terms of how you're moving and navigating in the world around you. Sometimes there's an exchange of spontaneity for intentional planning. There can be a lot of time together, and care partners can often find themselves over caring for the person, for the partner, and under caring for themselves. And in general, all caps, I'm not yelling, but just stressing the importance of there is a lot of stress. So the next slide, let's talk about navigating toward a healthy relationship with the care partner. So I think, again, these are suggestions. These are kind of field notes, so to speak. So these are just ideas, things to get you thinking about in terms of how to navigate towards a healthy relationship with your care partner and between the two of you. Make time to do things that you enjoy that has a non-PD focus. Sometimes it can be very, very easy and almost a natural move in that direction, but try to do things that are different. Maybe there's old routines that you can adopt, make adaptations of, and bring back rather than focused on, not only it's not medication management, but the things that you're doing, the things that you're engaging in. Set aside time to talk and plan. Days might be fuller and different. And so when oftentimes in a couple, there's kind of movement from one room to another, and you're talking and sharing and communicating with each other, which is fine about sharing information. But I think with PD and with all that's going on, I would really encourage a time to sit down, not only make plans, but then also to check in with each other. How are you doing? How are you feeling? Where's your energy level today? How's the week going? Checking in becomes an important thing. It's something that we often take for granted in relationships. I think it's also important to recount good times in the day. Sometimes it might be a great idea to set up an evening ritual where you might take a moment at the end of the day and just reflect and say, what went well today? Or start out the day and say, let's take a moment, let's set a positive intention. What are we going to look for? What are you looking forward to? This is what I'm looking forward to, for example. And I think it's important to acknowledge its challenges, but also make room for the victories. Rick Hansen is a neuroscientist and has done lots of studies in meditation and mindfulness in the brain. And Rick says that the brain teaches, kind of approaches positive things. Like I think my visual is like an egg on Teflon. It just goes, a Teflon pan just slides right off. But the harder parts of life are like Velcro, and it has a tendency to stick in our minds. So sometimes it can be an active practice to focus more on the victories than on the problems. Problems seem like a natural place that our minds would rest. Be fair about expectations of yourself and your care partner. There could be conflicts that predated Parkinson's disease, coping styles that predated Parkinson's disease. And in fairness, these things might not change. They actually might be a helpmate, but it would be unrealistic to think that these things would go away because of the diagnosis. So be fair, leave room for each other and one another. I say here, pause, don't forget to drink water. And that's my way of saying when things are getting rough during the day or maybe even between partners, pause. Get a glass of water. Take care of yourself. Do something simple and good and easy for yourself. Just take good care. Find time to enjoy each other and life together as well as separately, right? So there's a lot of togetherness, which is wonderful. But also make time separately. Have your own either there have your own identities, whether it may be PD focused or it could be something different. Like I said, an old routine, an old connection. A light touch can be the best medicine. In some circles, we call it being light and polite. That sometimes the heaviness of days and the challenges can really overshadow. Maybe there's time to take a moment and focus on something lighter. Maybe it's a beautiful day. We were talking about fall colors. Just a moment to make it things lighter and to look at the whole, like kind of zoom out on that map. Take a broader look about what's going on. One of my care partners this last week was talking about redefining fun, that sometimes with some of the changes in movements and some of the changes related to Parkinson's disease, that the old ways of having fun might be more of a challenge. So she was saying that she likes to redefine fun, that she likes to do things, maybe if they're going out to have a doctor's appointment, for example, that they would take time to maybe stop and have a cup of tea or have a cup of coffee or do something different, reimagine fun. Fun might not be going out, fun might be staying home and doing a word game for brain health, right? Doing something that would be fun, reimagining, redefining fun. And I always think that planning for when you're feeling your best, particularly those who are diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, is a key point. If there's, I think we want to play to our strengths. We want to unlock the strengths within. And certainly being mindful of the times of day when you're at your best is when planning things, particularly in partnership, would be important to do things different. And those times when you're feeling really good, it's okay to play to your strength. In fact, I'd encourage you to think about in those terms. And communication is always the foundation of a healthy relationship. So just like in the second point, set aside time to talk and plan, set aside time to communicate, check in with each other, find out what's going on, how are things going, what can be done differently, or just some ideas about navigating toward healthy relationships with care partners. So I'd like to talk a little bit now about when it's time for support. And I just want to briefly speak about this because I think in any relationship, sometimes things can get overwhelming, and particularly when dealing with a chronic health issue. So if you and your partner are getting stuck on a particular issue, if the communication is overshadowed with health concerns, if your feelings are escalating, there's lots of frustration, lots of anger, overwhelm, or impatience. Usually think of impatience as a really great red flag, like something's going on if we're impatient with one another. Their resentments cloud communication, which they often can, or the question formulates, maybe it's time that we reach out. Maybe we call APDA and find out if there's some kind of support. Usually when that question is formulated, it's time you're seeing things. So I can't tell you how important it is to find support and reach out if needed. Like Brene Brown said, we're not meant to do this alone. We're never intended to do. So reach out, get support, get help from people who can help you navigate to healthy relationship. So let's talk a little bit now about navigating relationship with friends. And Mary Yerkes did this an article on resilience and in the face of chronic health issues, and she had 10 tips. Two of the tips I think are really pertinent for today. One is building strong and healthy relationships with family and friends, and the other is surround yourself with people who affirm you, who recognize your strengths and natural innate abilities, and provide the support and acceptance you need. That's part of navigating. That's part of resilience. That's part of unlocking the strength within. So let's talk about some of the changes that one might find in terms of relationship in Parkinson's disease. What oftentimes comes up almost to a person when I'm sitting with them when they've been given a diagnosis of Parkinson's disease is to tell or not to tell family or friends, for example. And that doesn't always have to be only at the beginning of the journey. It could be at midpoint when symptoms are changing, when movement is changing, vocal tone, other things are changing as well. To tell or not to tell. tell. Telling people, maybe risking the discomfort of their reaction, maybe some questions, not to tell people the pressure of maybe hiding some of the symptoms, maybe the stress or strain. So to tell or not to tell sometimes can impact and change a relationship. And we always want to be forthcoming in our relationship, particularly our close relationships. But it's that to tell or not to tell is something that's important and is certainly a personal choice. Sometimes people with Parkinson's are concerned about the symptoms and how they might be noticed and how people might find them and feel uncomfortable. And so that might change. There may be mobility, ease of movement might be the dominant challenge. What if I meeting my friend and I find that I have to like look on the floor just to make sure that everything's clear, that I'm safer, I'm feeling a little out of balance. Those kinds of things can impact and maybe hold you back from reaching out and connecting with friends. Fatigue eats up motivation. I don't know about all of you who are joining today, but fatigue seems to be the number one thing that I hear from the community members that I'm serving can really eat up motivation and really kind of sap the joy of seeing friends and connecting because you just don't feel right, just feel exhausted. Certainly with Parkinson's disease, there are good days and bad days that are unpredictable, which really impact plans that you're making and might change them. It may feel too hard to make a plan in case something might have to or need to be changed, or muscling through and being terribly uncomfortable and not feeling well. I often think that there are workarounds that get you through your day, and sometimes those workarounds that you have may impact the rhythm of visits, dinners, trips, things that friends are might be accustomed to seeing you behaving or acting, looking a particular way. And so these workarounds, whether it's bringing a cane, taking a little bit more time, getting up from a seat, maybe having to speak a little louder in case there's vocal changes, sometimes can be a hindrance and inhibit us from reaching out and connecting. MD appointments consuming energy, like we talk, leaving little time for fun. I've already had my appointment for today. I don't know. I just really can't. I don't know that I have the energy. And sometimes PD focused events and engagement becomes way more comfortable. And so the balance is, how do I balance between my friends who don't have Parkinson's and now my new community, these people who I have support with, who understand, who we can speak in shorthand to. I don't have to maybe explain. Planning and intentional effort versus spontaneity might be hard to accept. Again, remembering that sometimes the spontaneity that we used to have in terms of movement and engagement might have to change for planned and intentional effort. Different, not bad. I'll talk about that in a few minutes. And that might be hard to accept and might hold back in terms of your wanting to reach out and connect with friends. And avoiding, declining invitations, not picking up the phone, saying more than yes to invitations might be easier. And I just really caution you when those things start happening more and more, it's really time to maybe review something like this, where the importance of navigating relationships and moving through. So let's talk about navigating towards healthy relationship with friends. So what I really encourage, and again, these are field notes and just ideas to give you to start thinking about how you might be able to do things differently. Pick safe or safer friends to try new things out with. I think we all have friends who are kind of at the bullseye, who are the closest, and then friends that have different relationships that might not be at close. You want close, you want to go for the bullseye, the closest friends, picking safe friends to try new things. Find easy starts to do things differently with friends. It doesn't have to be big trips or big meals. It could be just doing things differently, like reaching out at different times of the day or making plans at different times of the day. You might want to try out open discussions about the changes. And sometimes it's hard to open up. And again, trying easier, just initiating conversation. I have, and doing that. Maybe using your care partner as someone that maybe role play and get ideas from. Find out if they find out what their concerns are with your friends. You may be asking them questions rather than starting out with sharing deeply. Find out if they have questions that you can answer for them. Sometimes friends are hesitant because they're not sure how open you are. So if you open that door, you might be surprised to see how willing and open friends are to ask questions and to be present. Flexibility in planning is key. You and friends, a plan A, a plan B, a plan C. Also, another key point of flexibility is in what connecting with friends might look like. It might be that regular Friday evening get together, which might be harder. It might end up being a Saturday morning brunch or a Sunday afternoon coffee, things like that, just for an example, just ways to connect. Or it might be just be a phone call rather than actually seeing someone. Let friends know how and when they can be supportive and helpful. And sometimes that not knowing can be awkward and uncomfortable for everyone. So you might want to say, this is when I have challenges. When I'm talking and in the middle of my sentence, I might lose my train of thought or I might lose that word. If that happens, if you can just give me a minute and let me see if I can find that word, it will likely come from me. It'll come to me, but so if you could if you could just support me in a moment as I gather my thoughts together and see if it'll come back, that would be really helpful. So things like that, moving in that kind of direction with friends. Again, initiating activities when you're feeling your best, I can't tell you how important that is. Again, it's playing to that strength within. The days when you're feeling that part of the day when you're feeling good, the time to take those kind of riskier behaviors, right? Make it as easy as possible to go out, make that call, send that email. Again, the better part of the day. If you're exhausted, if you just got home from a doctor's appointment or done a couple things like errands, it's okay to take a rest and maybe hold off and do something different in terms of making these connections at another time. I think it's important to challenge expectations and old ideas. And I think that sometimes we think when we have been given a diagnosis like Parkinson's disease, that things are different and the different is bad. But I'm here to say that the different is not bad. It's just a new way of navigating not only yourself, but relationship with friends, for example. So I can't speak enough about the power of patience with yourself with these changes, right? Different is not bad. Different is different. So let's talk a little bit about navigating the relationship with self. This is like the perfect timing, right? Navigating relationship with self. Kristen Neff, who is an expert on self-compassion, and you can look her work up, and I highly encourage that actually. She says at the most basic level, self-compassion simply requires being a good friend to ourselves. And I think when we're talking about relationship to self, particularly with a chronic health issue like Parkinson's disease, that self-compassion is a superpower. It's something that we can take with us and really make a difference. It can be really important in terms of navigating not only relationship with self, but relationship with others. Let's talk a little bit about the changes that we might experience with Parkinson's disease with ourselves. Sometimes the physical and emotional changes impact our self-image. The symptoms management can become a daily focus. And sometimes, if we don't hit the mark, if we fall short, miss a medication, don't feel like going to physical therapy, don't get done all in a day what you were hoping to do, you might judge yourself harshly. The plans change to accommodate PD. You might be making like I'm talking a lot about changing and changing plans, accommodating, that sometimes it's easy to see that as a defeat. Oh, I can't do things the way I used to. That's really so hard on me. I'm not saying it's not hard, but it's not a point. It can feel defeating, but it's not a point of defeat. And hopefully we'll talk about that in a moment. Fears can cause detours in the most optimistic of us, like talking about, what's in the future. Fears, sometimes the community that I work will talk about going down the rabbit hole. That our fears can hijack us, like I said, even the most optimistic of days and people. Challenges may be easier to focus on than victories, like Rick Hansen said. Our brains are kind of wired to the good stuff just disappears and the harder things stick like Velcro. So we might have a tendency to focus on those problems, our brain chemistry, our brain design. We might have to have an effort to look at things differently. Our internal landscapes might be unfriendly. We might have carried this all the way through our lives. And so here we face Parkinson's disease and changes in the day, and it might still continue to be unfriendly. Our self-talk or the narrative might be pushy, harsh, negative, and unhelpful. Now, sometimes we can find that narrative. And we all resist change. And we're talking about a lot of change and doing things differently. It's our humanity. No one accepts change, but it's important to think differently. Kind of, again, that zooming out on the map, zooming out on the more of the journey in ways that we can relate better to ourselves. So let's talk about navigating toward healthy relationship with self. And I think first and foremost is an approach to self would be to bring support and kindness. I can't tell you how powerful kindness is, particularly when we bring it to ourselves. I think it's important to soften that critical eye. I mean, sometimes our brains are wired like that, right? To be critical. It's about, we all have drive. We all want to do things just so, just right. But ease that critical eye when it comes to ourselves. Be a friend to yourself. Having that self awareness, mindfulness, like to think of it as just simply paying attention to how you're doing. When's the best part? Of the day for you? When's that optimal, that window of time? When it's not, don't give yourself a hard time. We'll talk about that in a minute. Not giving yourself a hard time about having that hard time. That's when to apply self compassion. That's when to apply kindness, right? Make note of the victories. Can make a big difference to note what things are going right, and then celebrate yourself. Celebrate. Our choice, I have a gentleman, that I work with who says, and he's been living with Parkinson's disease for about 10 years, and he says, "I make a conscious choice to make the changes that I experience during the day a disruption, not a takeover." And he has a very strong approach, and it's that idea. There's so many parts of this is that it's about choice, about doing things differently, right? Trade all or nothing thinking to maybe all or something thinking. Take gentleness breaks, breathe, take a moment to pause, to respond to yourself when you're having a hard time. Don't be harsh. Don't have that negative, try not to have a negative reaction, but a positive and kind response. Don't give yourself a hard time about having a hard time. Don't we all, in all our circumstances, have hard parts of the day? That would be the time, again, to apply kindness, to apply self compassion. And it's practicing self compassion minute by minute. It's not something that just happens, it's something really that we get to practice. And it's about learning to trust yourself with yourself. Really, we are our best allies. And I think that that's well illustrated with how we treat ourselves, right? And get support for this new approach with yourself. Kristen Neff, there's great work out there that we're happy to get information to APDA, but ways that you can do it. You can call into local chapters and find out what are some really good resources and ways to support myself as I change my relationship with myself. And in this world of mindfulness and self compassion, which I find myself in. Um, there are several authors who are coming up with the title of books called "You Were Made for This," and it's about really facing what we're all facing in terms of the world stage right now. And but I think when we look back to our own individual and our very personal journeys, I think we have to remember that we were made for this. That when we're talking about unlocking our personal strength, we're not unlocking something that we don't know about. We've all lived lives to this particular point. That's where the resilience is. You were made for this. These adaptations, these navigations are absolutely possible. And sometimes it's with others, and sometimes the very potent place is with ourselves, bringing our own strength, finding the power in kindness and self compassion. So as we're going to be winding down the presentation today, the navigations with self to like I talked about in terms of that navigational gauge, right? Be open to course corrections, flexible and nimbleness in terms of our emotional well-being and how we look at ourselves. Self-awareness, mindfulness, paying attention to self is critical. Self-compassion, patience, gentleness, breaks, kindness are all part of that self-compassion that we get to reapply and apply. And again, it's a practice and get support. There are communities of people who are practicing self compassion. Access that. You would bring so much to them, and they would bring so much to you. So let's talk a little bit about the next slide about navigating relationships. And this is generally in summary. That whether we're talking about relationship with others, with our care partners, our friends, and ourselves, we want to set kind intentions. Be open to course corrections. Just doing things differently. Different isn't bad. Different is different. Communicating is essential. We're communicating with care partners, communicating with friends and family, we're communicating with ourselves. And trust your own resilience. Trust what's brought you here to this moment. I like these visuals because I like to see that the challenges that will come up resulting from Parkinson's disease are detours and road bumps. Road bumps. wait, yeah. They're just bumps in the road. They're not stop signs. They're just detours and just ways that might slow us down, but we don't have to stop. So let me end with a quote. Just like exercise, sleep, and nutrition are important for our body, so is connection, so is relationship. I'm so glad that you joined me here today. I'm going to ask Anushika to come and join me. And if there's any questions that you might have, if there are things that you've noticed that have been empowering as you've navigated relationships with yourself or with others, I'd love to hear them and love to open up. I know it's hard. I have to say that my one regret is that I can't see all of you. I wish I could see your faces and see how you're doing.
Sheila, that was wonderful information, and I'm so excited to dive into the audience's questions. First, we do have someone who asked, what advice do you have for somebody who is pretty isolated? I live alone, I have no care partner, and my only family lives out of state.
Mm, that's a really great question and a really tremendous challenge, particularly when we're talking about how important connections are to physical, emotional, and social health, as well as spiritual health. So I think would be, I think that in the same way that I say with relationships that you would start safe and slow, I would reach out if there's a neighbor, maybe, or if there's a community like a local center, if there's any kind of a spiritual community that you might be able to reach out to, I would start there. And it doesn't have to actually mean getting out physically first. The easy part might be making some calls to find out if there's at some of the local centers, they have people who could call in and just double check. APDA oftentimes is a really great resource. I find many of the many I say that there's many opportunities within the Parkinson's disease community to have twofers. So when you're given a diagnosis, and I understand the question is about isolation. So you've been given a diagnosis, you find yourself at home alone. Now what do I do? The idea that you might get out and do physical therapy, for example, to engage in like a boxing class, to do something that would be beneficial for your body, would also be beneficial for making those connections. I call it the twofer. You go in with the idea of health maintenance, but what you leave with is connection and community. So I might start doing something like that, making just a few calls, finding out what's available, kind of those easy kind of one steps that you might otherwise overlook.
Absolutely. Thank you for providing those suggestions for where people can go to find supportive communities like community centers, senior centers, and faith centers, or even libraries. So thank you. And we have another question from our audience. Someone said, what if someone treats you like they don't want to be with you or speak to you? And I'm not sure if this happened after the diagnosis or after the symptoms became visible, but do you have any advice?
That's a really good question, and I'm sorry that you're experiencing that. I think sometimes people need to be educated, and my knee-jerk reaction would be to, if you think that they're acting like that, I would want to encourage you, if you're brave, and this is risky, to maybe ask them about, maybe approach them and introduce yourself. And I don't know if this is a friend. I have actually more questions than your one question to get clarification. But sometimes we can really, our greatest fears, we can project onto what we think, how people are acting. So again, this idea of navigating and doing things differently, and maybe think, I wonder if that's what's going on. Maybe you can investigate. And it might be just approaching someone, introducing yourself, talking about something very different, and maybe asking that question, asking some questions about that.
Hard to have that conversation, but so important. So,
It is.
yeah, I have another question that's come in from the audience. Someone has said, my mom has PD, my parents fight. There's lots of resentment clouding communications, a lot about stupid stuff, and I think they need outside help. Any advice on getting them to go? So, like maybe to a couples therapist or relationship therapist.
Absolutely. Great question, and I hope that I was able to illustrate some of the changes that happen with Parkinson's disease, right? That some of the tensions that are added with care partners and between your folks, it sounds like, very common, I have to say. A lot of it is fueled by fear, and I think that it might. What I would suggest is I would suggest that you do your footwork and explore what resources are available, calling APDA, calling local resources, finding out what resources are out there and doing a little bit of homework, and then start to maybe gently start encouraging and maybe bringing it to their attention that you've been noticing these things. Again, this is all about communication. I don't know how safe you feel or how comfortable, but I might say, I'm really concerned about you. It seems like things are really tense, and then maybe start. I call it dripping, like start dripping and discussing these things. This is an option. What do you think about this in terms of connecting with a counselor, maybe even somebody through a local chapter of APDA?
Absolutely. Thank you. And so, really, that ties into this next question, which is, where do I go to find a couples or relationship therapist? Can I get a referral from my doctor? How do I find one?
Yeah, great question. Absolutely. I think that um, it would be really important when we're talking about the entirety of health, right? That mind, body, spirit graph is really thinking of you as a whole person. And so, talking to even your movement disorder specialist about what's going on, if there's things going on at home, sometimes they can normalize it or say to you, "Yeah, I hear that a lot, and I'm happy to give a referral, or I'm happy to talk to you about what resources are." But absolutely call local chapters of APDA and talk about what resources are there, as well as maybe if you're going to support groups and talking to other people who have been diagnosed and other care partners about what they're doing and how they're navigating would be another way. But those are the kinds of things. Absolutely talking to the specialists, talking to physicians who might know in network, because I know we're talking about have to talk about insurances and things like that, about what might be available.
Thank you. I think absolutely turning to a support group for referrals can be so helpful.
hmm That's
And
often the best way to find things is like talking to other people who are going through this, even if you're sitting in a support group or you're going to, like a boxing class or you're going to a physical therapy, you're going to classes, and if you can, again, this is all kind of risky business talking and communicating about these things. But my hunch is, and more often than not, people are going through a very, very similar situation. I think one of the hardest parts of all of this is that when we experience these things, we feel like these are unique to us, and what we find out is they're not unique to us. That this happens over. This is many times that these great questions that you're bringing up are very, very common, and so the solutions are out there. It's just a matter of risking and asking that question.
absolutely. And I think you have touched on this a little bit, but it relates to this question here. I don't want to burden my loved one or my kids about my diagnosis. I feel ashamed of having PD. Where can I start to not feel alone?
What a great question. I certainly understand that. That word burden comes up a lot. And where can I start to not feel alone? That's a great question. I think that if you do not have friends that are in your close circle that you can start talking to about that, at least bringing it up and being able to give voice to it, sometimes that's really helpful, just talking about it. I absolutely would turn to the Parkinson's community, to APDA, local chapters, information referral centers, talking about and start maybe connecting with others who, just like we were talking about, who would have experiences. And I do have to say, I know that you don't want to be a burden, but I would just really encourage you to have some conversations if you can with who's ever easiest, whether it's a care partner or maybe one of your children, about what you might be feeling, because it could be a really wonderful opportunity to open communication and a dialogue. 'Cause, I hear that a lot, and usually the flip side of that is that your family is really, really very concerned about that, and would be available with some support to help in any way.
Yeah. Absolutely. I agree. I think that looking to, maybe have that conversation with family or friends would be really helpful. So
Mhm.
we have another question from our audience. Someone has said, my husband is kind and serviceful, and he sometimes seems to think I can do more. I only ask for help as needed. Also, my husband is not interested in support for caregivers. How to help?
Great question. So it's kind of a two-part. So it sounds like that your husband is kind and attentive, but expects more. Yeah, that would be a point where you would want to try to open the communication as much as you can in terms of being honest and forthcoming about that. And sometimes that might be, um, oftentimes these things get brought up in the movement disorder specialist office, where it's a safe, where there's a third party. Sometimes you can talk about that. Say sometimes, it could help that navigate. That might be your first form. I think that I would, if you could have a discussion about that and speak frankly and openly and from your heart about what you can and can't do. Of course, sometimes care partners do push, so they do that over caring piece. But to have an open a conversation, and I think that really our best defense in terms of all of this is to take care of ourselves. You can talk to your husband and remind him about the services, but when he's ready, he could reach. He might not. Some people just are never do that, or reluctantly, or it takes something that pushes them in one direction or another. So I would focus more on making sure that your voice is heard, that you're acknowledging, the initial part of that question is that you feel sometimes pushed and that you'd like to have a different kind of balance between what you can do and be heard about that. Um, yeah, and then in his time, he'll either come around hopefully and get the support, or it would be hard. I think it would add an extra layer of stress to push care partners in that direction. Would be my opinion.
Thank you, Sheila. And I think that's really helpful advice. So, another question that we have here is, what are some examples of positive self talk for a person with Parkinson's? Because my self talk can be really negative.
Yeah, a really great question. So again, I think that negative self-talk can really kind of, it's usually unwelcome, but unfortunately for many of us, it's part of our narrative, our running narrative. And I think if you were having a hard time, let's say you missed medication, for example, I don't know exactly. I would love this is again why I love to chat with you. But let's say you miss a medication and you think, my mind, I mean, I'm so forgetful. I'm having such a, I here I've done it again. What's wrong with me? I just can't get myself together. I think that you'd wanna say, "Oh, hold on a minute. You're having I you know, these things happen, Everybody forgets medication, you know? It's taking a really kind approach. Think of things one of the directors that Kristen Neff would say would be is, what would you say to a friend? If a friend had forgotten their medication, what would you say to them? You would certainly wouldn't give them a hard time. You'd say, "Everybody forgets their medication sometime. You'll catch up." Are there ways that we can help to remind you? Maybe write a note, do something different, but be able to even though I don't know if you noticed my voice changed, my register, I relaxed, like even that stance, that energy. So treating yourself like a friend, I think, is a really excellent first line defense for that critical self-talk. And then once practiced, then you can expand that a little bit. But also always kindness, befriending yourself, and giving yourself a break. Go easy. Go easy on yourselves.
Thank you, Sheila. I think that's great advice for care partners as well, and for everyone, really. And we have time for one last question. And that question is, what can I tell myself to break out of apathy or fatigue toward the idea of getting out of the house to socialize?
That's a great question and a challenging one, because I think that once we're isolated, once we're in kind of, we're at home, we're comfortable. um, it's hard to break out of those routines. So I would really encourage just I know this is going to sound almost silly, but just even practicing just leaving the house, even to go to take a walk a little bit out of around, not even around the block, but just maybe down the driveway and up. Maybe go to am I answering the question, Anushka? I'm so sorry. I think am I answering it? About getting
I
out when
think
you're
that's
isolated, things that
exactly,
you can talk to
yeah,
yourself? Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
I would take it easy. I wouldn't have high expectations. I think that sometimes high expectations set you up for failure. And when you're doing something different, you want to do things to encourage yourself to keep it going. And it might feel that no matter what you do, whether it's taking a walk, making a call, if you haven't talked to a friend in a while, I haven't talked to you in a while, can we meet for coffee? Do something really simple like that. But set it up so that you're not overstepping over, kind of over expecting of yourself. Because, different is going to feel uncomfortable, you know. And so I would really encourage to, just start small and be kind to yourself and realize that it might feel uncomfortable, but don't let that discomfort stop you. Don't let that speed bump, don't let that detour stop you. It's a speed bump, it's a detour. Keep moving, navigating movement, movement, movement with care and safely. Mm.
Thank you, Sheila. And I think that ties into what you said earlier, where maybe if going out of the house is too hard, one day you do a phone call instead.
Exactly, exactly, and that's the kind of, I would say, baby steps, do you know what I'm saying? But the idea that you would do a little, and then you'll gain confidence, and then if as long as it's manageable, don't do anything too big. It'll be too hard. We want you to succeed.
Thank you so much, Sheila, for being here, for sharing your expertise, your thoughtful responses to all of the questions. We all appreciate you so much.
Oh, thanks,
So
Anishka.
with that, I want to invite all of you to visit apdaparkinson.org to register and learn more about our next program, Shedding Light in the Shadows, Understanding Depression and Parkinson's Disease, on December 12th with Dr. Natalie Diaz. Thank you so much for joining us today, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. Take care.
Hi, I'm Leslie Chambers, the President and CEO of the American Parkinson Disease Association. Each month across the country, APDA is providing support groups, exercise classes, and educational programs like this one to support the Parkinson's disease community. You can find all of our upcoming virtual events on our website at apdaparkinson.org/events. If you enjoyed today's broadcast, I hope you will consider making a donation to help keep programs like this possible. Your gift can help APDA support people living with PD through local programs, reliable resources, and groundbreaking research designed to find treatments and ultimately the cure for Parkinson's disease. Please donate today at apdaparkinson.org/donate. And thank you so much for your support.